the webinar and go live, and that's when we could.
Amazing. Thank you
Perfect.
for everything, Fatma.
You're welcome.
Hi, Maryam.
Okay. We went live on YouTube, so I'll just copy the link. I think I'm not sure how these people got like this link, like the people on YouTube. So that's very interesting.
Well, that's probably my fault, but what was wrong? Sorry.
No. Like people are already on the YouTube, so it's amazing.
Okay,
but
good.
how they got
Okay.
that link?
Yeah.
I put it on our Instagram.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And so Fatma, let me know when to start exactly.
Do you want to start now? We already have 375 participants, and
Okay.
they're quickly filling up. Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine.
So we're live, huh?
Yeah. Yep. So you can start whenever, and we're recording, by the way. So.
Okay, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Sharif Abdel Mohsen. I'm the chair of the Department of Architecture at the American University in Cairo, AUC. So on behalf of the department here at AUC, I would really like to welcome you all to this exciting and long-awaited teach-in. This is actually only the beginning of a very exciting event we're holding here at AUC. It's part of a series that we call Architecture Li, or Architecture, or Why Architecture in Arabic. And this is our fourth big event this year. So this is Architecture Li 4.0. Our event for these coming days is titled 10 Days of Architectural Fortitude, where during, these testing times and, with all the atrocities that our Palestinian brothers and sisters are facing on a daily basis, this 10-day journey, actually from today, the 11th to the 20th of November, takes place against this, the backdrop of a world in crisis, actually. Our intent here throughout the coming 10 days is not only to demonstrate, solidarity and support, but to actually develop an initiative that stands as a beacon of hope and knowledge and reflection. Our journey consists of a series of internal and public events, talks, teach-ins, dialogues, organized and hosted by the Department of Architecture at AUC, together with its Architecture Alumni Association and the Student-Led Architecture Association and Next to Arc Lab. But for today, we're actually thrilled to have with us Léopold Lambert for this funambulist organized event, which we're really happy to host today as part of our series. And we're really excited to have him in the first launch for this series. I'm sure it's going to be a very thought-provoking talk with a lot of, food for thought. Léopold is the editor-in-chief of The Funambulist, a platform that engages with the politics of space and bodies. He's a trained architect, as well as the author of multiple books that examine the inherent violence of architecture on bodies and its political instrumentalization at various scales and in various geographical contexts. He's the author of Weaponized Architecture, The Impossibility of Innocence, the Topie Impitoyable, The Corporeal Politics of the Cloth, the Wall, and the Street, and La Politique du Bulldozer, La Ruine Palestinienne comme Projet Israélien, and also his book States of Emergency, A Spatial History of the French Colonial Continuum. Léopold's teach-in is titled today The Architecture of Settler Colonialism in Palestine. What a timely topic to discuss among architecture students. We're excited to host this event, which is open for all architecture students worldwide. I think we have quite a number registered for the event. I think 7,500 or 8,000 or so. We're really excited to host this funambulist event. And I quote here from Léopold's introductory text, which I'm sure touches on much of what we are feeling on a daily basis. As he said, we're currently millions to feel powerless, witnessing from afar the genocide currently unfolding in our Palestinians of Gaza. Fighting this powerless means organizing for tomorrow to support at our own scale the Palestinian struggle for liberation. And in order to do so, we need to be useful where we can. And for architecture students, as he said, this may mean understanding the geography and architecture of Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine, to then be able to act upon this understanding. And I'm sure this touches upon what we all feel, and sure we will all come out of this event feeling useful where we can. So without further ado, Léopold, we're really happy to have you with us today, and looking forward to a very exciting talk and discussion and dialogue with not necessarily all the 8,000 participants, but some discussions along the way. So Léopold, really happy to have you, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Sharif, and a huge thanks to you and to the rest of the team, Fatma, Mariam, and many others at the American University of Cairo who accepted to host us today. Because, as you may or may not know, it's not that easy to find a Zoom account that can accommodate for that many people. I'm very glad that that you are all here today. Thank you so much for joining us from pretty much all around the world. I know that our friends and comrades in Eastern Asia and Oceania have the worst time zone to. I made the worst choice for their time zone for them to be able to follow, but hopefully they will be able to follow us with the recording. And then we have a little bit of Kanakit to represent Melanesia and Oceania over here. I'm gonna start by reading something, because I also, as you can expect, I'm a little bit nervous talking to that many people. And I wanted to be quite deliberate about what I wanted to say as an introduction, but after that, it will become a little bit more organic. So let's go for it. It's now been over a month. Sorry. It's now been over a month that all around the world, millions of us are screaming the word Gaza and ceasefire. Indeed, how could we think of anything else than the genocide currently occurring in Gaza? How could we fight for anything more urgent than for the murders, bombings, and invasion to stop? And yet, I am convinced. I am convinced that for us who are not below the bombs, we have a duty to think and organize beyond the scale of time of the ceasefire, and to reach the scale of time of liberation, and to think and organize beyond the scale of space that is Gaza, to reach the scale of space of the whole Palestine and even the world. As we've wrote in our statement for the Funambulist 3 weeks ago, we would like, that's just a short excerpt. We would like all of us to understand that the powerlessness so many of us have been feeling these past couple of weeks is what we are doomed to feel year after years if the massive, beautiful impetus of solidarity for a free Palestine only happens during the most murderous, most spectacular form of Israeli settler colonial violence. We would like all of us to understand that if this impetus were to be sustained in time, months after the dreadful return to what many will call normal being a more swallowable reality where only the slow, mundane daily violence is at work, the international support Palestinians have been generously nurturing for decades will have an actual chance to contribute to decolonization. I'll go back to it in just a second, but I realized I just wanted to say a little bit, quote unquote, from where I'm speaking. So as Sharif generously introduced, I am the editor-in-chief and the founder of the magazine The Funambulist, that some of you might be familiar with, some of you might not. I think my dear colleague Shivangi Mariam Raj, who's our head of communication, would be mad at me if I would not encourage you all to subscribe while I have you listening. And then as the work that I will talk about today is a little bit closer to my own personal research as an architect and personal engagement for Palestine, for the liberation of Palestine. And it mostly was crystallized in those two books that Sheriff also quoted, Weaponized Architectures, The Impossibility of Innocence, that was written in 2010, and the Bulldozer Politics, the Palestinian Ruin as an Israeli project, that was published in 2016. If I'm being quite honest, I think that, you know, they were written a long time ago, so I feel that I have a slightly more precise perspective on the matter now. But I guess we all have to work towards making our perspective a little bit sharper throughout the year. So that's what I'm dedicated to do. If I continue my small written introduction, and put us back very much in the topic that is at hand today. Something that I should say also is that this is the one sort of quote unquote theoretical slide of the presentation. Everything else will be very much more on the documentary side of things, and also very much calibrated for an architecture student audience. And you know, I'm of course aware that out of the 8,000 people who registered to the presentation, many of them might not be architecture students, and many of them might actually know relatively well the topic at hand here. And so, but you know, I think for me it was important to almost go back to the basics, so to speak, and so talk to an audience who perhaps need a little bit of catching up, so to speak. Something else I can say is that every document I'm showing today, I have 170 slides, by the way, so brace yourself. We're going to be together for about 2 hours, but and I'll try not to spend an entire minute on each slide. Of course, that would be excruciating, but just so you know. And all of those slides are my own documents, whether maps or photos. And the reason I do that is, I guess, for consistency, because you'll see, I think there's a sort of photographic and cartographic consistencies, a sort of graphic consistencies that I believe makes the presentation a little bit stronger. Also, because for me, it's often important to reduce to only 1 degree of separation, the separation between you, the viewers, and the document, the photo or the map. And this only degree of separation between you and the document is me, essentially. It's not mediated through anything else. So I think that that's also something that might be useful, especially in the context of Palestine. And then you will see that every one of those documents is dated, which I think also allows you to follow a little bit the last 15 years of evolution of the situation in Palestine through my own eyes, which of course is an extremely subjective perspective, but yet it is one that you know, I think it goes back to this idea of consistency. So I'll read just a little bit more, and then I'll go back to a more organic presentation. Settler colonialism essentially consists in occupying as much land as possible and push out indigenous nations who were not cleansed into overly controlled militarized reservations. It is therefore not surprising that architecture is settler colonialism's best friend. Nothing easier for architecture to embody and therefore enforce the settler colonial lines traced by the occupying power, as we will see today. Architecture is not a neutral discipline that can be used to do good or bad. It is a political weapon, and like most weapons, it serves more eagerly the regimes of domination and their police. But every now and then, it also provides advantageous spatial conditions for revolutionary struggles to deploy themselves. May our work as architects humbly contribute to those while never indulging with the others. All right. So that's it for the slightly more formal. So let's get to it with actually some of the most basic things, which is that when we talk about Palestine, we're talking about that land over here, and that includes the sort of three distinct territories that splits Palestine, whether it's Gaza, the West Bank, or what Palestinians called 48 Palestine, which is essentially the land of Israel today, of the Israeli state, and to also sort of explain how those three territories came to be, we have to go back to the 1948 Nakba, the catastrophe, and the 1967 Naksa, the setback, and those maps are trying to address that. The land in gray here, that is usually known as Israel, as 48 Palestine, is you can see those little white dots, which are essentially hundreds of Palestinian villages that in the months preceding the establishment of the State of Israel, and I think it's very important to say in the months preceding, meaning that during the British colonial occupation of Palestine, Zionist paramilitary groups practiced the ethnic cleansing of the territory, evicted all those villages, destroyed them, and displaced over 750,000 Palestinians from their land, who then became refugees in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and then formed more at large the large Palestinian diaspora around the world. So you can see those villages there that you will find also in the next map. The West Bank and Gaza from 1948 to 1967 were under respectively Jordanian and Egyptian administration, and then came the 1967 invasion during June of 1967 of the Israeli army, who took over East Jerusalem and the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the entire Sinai Peninsula, as you can see on the left map in Egypt, and then the Golan Heights in Syria that Israel still occupies today, on the top north of Palestine, outside of Palestine. I think it's important to say I've seen many maps of Palestine in the last few days where that includes the Golan as part of the revolutionary map of Palestine, of a future Palestine, and I think the Golan belongs to Syria, so it's important we take it out of our maps in our liberatory future, so to speak. If you allow me to move the north from the top of the map to the right of the map, so that we can, so that it's easier to deal with our horizontal format. This map is trying to be a comprehensive map, well, comprehensive yet not exhaustive, of course, far from it. Map of the various architectural apparatuses of Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine, including the Bedouin villages in the Nakab desert, so the desert in the south of Palestine, the Bedouin villages that are regularly destroyed by the Israeli army. So those are the little black and white dots here. I mean, they're pretty small. The villages from the Nakba, as you can see, that are the ones that were in white in the previous map. The various Israeli colonies within the West Bank, but also in 48 Palestine as well, that you can see in purple. And more generally, various architectural apparatuses that will go one by one throughout the presentation. So I'll go back to this map for quite a bit. And then you also have South Lebanon here, that was occupied from the beginning of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982 all the way to 2000. So for those who those of you who belong to my generation, you probably remember that. So let's start with Gaza, which I should say, and hopefully it's not too disappointing, but is probably the smallest part of this presentation, because as I say, it was important for me to speak with my own perspective and with my own documents. And it just so happens that I've never been allowed to get into Gaza, so I've never actually been. So I don't have any photos of the architectural apparatuses at work, but I worked on a few maps, including in the summer of 2014. That same thing, like people were maybe not overly young right now, remember as another absolutely dreadful time where we just couldn't sleep anymore, thinking of with so many people within Gaza who were being bombed and invaded by the Israeli army in 2014. And so that's a map that I had made back then to show how the Gaza Strip is being has its own architectural apparatus of occupation, and a particularly violent one that, you know, allows us to sometimes to say that Gaza is the biggest prison on earth, which, you know, sometimes is also something that is a little bit complicated to say, because it's also a place of life. It's also a place where people are in love, where people live, and so to call it the biggest prison on earth, I mean, I suppose in prison also prisoners manage to find a way to live despite the horrible conditions in which they live. But I personally never really embrace that metaphor of the biggest prison on earth. But the reason why some people would say that is because Gaza is literally surrounded by a blockade architectural apparatus, which essentially consists in a wall, as well as various zones that creates the width of the wall, so to speak, where people are being quite literally shot at when they penetrated. And that's something I had, you know, I told you it's a 2014 map, but I had done like a very, very small update in 2018 during the march of return of Palestinian Gazans walking towards the wall and being shot at by snipers. So those are the little black arrows you can see. And then the sea itself is being sealed by the Israeli Navy. It's written 6 nautical miles as a limit here, and I drew it to scale. So this is essentially as far as various Palestinian ships in boats, in particular fishermen boats, can go without being destroyed. And sometimes this limit is actually brought to a much closer to the shore. And I actually should have checked, but I would not be surprised that right now it's actually the case that we might be down to 3 nautical miles, or perhaps not even 0. And then on the south side of the Gaza Strip, the Egyptian border usually brings absolutely no solace whatsoever to Palestinians in Gaza. There was a small exception when Morsi was ruling Egypt in between 2011 to 2013. But both Mubarak and Sisi have been absolutely ruthless in the ways that they didn't provide any sort of assistance to Palestinian people in Gaza. And perhaps if we go, well, and those are other maps that I had made in 2014 and that I think still applies today, which shows very much how the Israeli army in its sort of genocidal effort is, and in the way of being sort of allowing it to deploy its violence without being necessarily while deploying also a sort of legal language that seem to justify seems to make lawful the killing of so many Palestinians. They sort of invent their own rule of the game, including the one in 2014 to increase the no-go zone from 100 meters to the next to the wall to 3 kilometers, as you can see, making the entire zone of this 3 kilometers offset from the wall like a just free like a zone in which any person who basically lives or stays can be killed because has been warned not to be in that zone. And that's exactly what the Israeli army did this year as well, with, in that case, having the entire north half of the Gaza Strip as being like a zone in which people are considered to have been warned and therefore can be killed without sort of any legal complication, so to speak. And of course, we know that the rest of the strip currently the southern part is barely any safer anyway. But what it allowed to do is to actually, again in 2023, in 2014 already, but in 23 in an even more drastic way, because again, like, just think of basically this entire part of Gaza being in the area that is considered as being bombable, if you allow me for this horrible word, and basically in doing so allowed for 1.5 million Palestinians to be displaced from their home and brought to the south in a way that is very that is also trying to, I mean, that very, very much failed to dissimulate the ambition of the Israeli state, which is to evict most Gazans, if not all Palestinians of Gaza, to Egypt, and to create another Nakba. If we do focus on the most southern part of Gaza, so basically the area here that is very close from the Egyptian border, some things that I had been trying to do a few years after, well, just a year after that, is to look at this very area and see, in particular, see how the sort of the layer of history of this particular area, which is the south part of a town, or it's the middle of a town called Rafah, which actually has a part in Gaza and a part in Egypt, and was cut by the border, by the colonial border, and how those historical layers inform us about the various layers of destruction that the Israeli state have been implementing on Palestinian homes. In particular, in 1971, Ariel Sharon, who you might remember as former Prime Minister of Israel, in particular during the Second Intifada, but used to be like a general of the Israeli army and the one in charge of the Gaza Strip in the years that followed the invasion of the Gaza Strip, that followed 1967. Sharon, influenced by many other colonial wars, in particular the French counter-revolution in Algeria, knew that Palestinian refugee camps, and we'll get to it at the very, very end of the talk, of the teaching, Palestinian refugee camps are areas that are actually the most dangerous for the occupying army because of its very dense and very sinuous and areas where Palestinian fighters actually can fight the Israeli army despite the incredible asymmetry of power that is at stake. And so Sharon ordered the destruction of 2,500 Palestinian homes in 1971, and in particular dug like, instead of the small space between each building of the Palestinian refugee camps, had bulldozers digging what later would be called the Sharon Boulevard by Palestinians. And the boulevard here refer to the way in Paris, where I am right now, the Haussmann, the prefect of Paris during Napoleon III's rule, created like entire very large avenues within the city, within proletarian working class neighborhoods that tended to foment insurrections, to very much split those neighborhoods into several parts and to be able to bring the army in a much more efficient way to counter those insurrections. And so Sharon did the same in 1971. Then in 1982, when Israel reluctantly left the Sinai Peninsula after being defeated by the Egyptian army, the Israeli state destroyed another few hundreds of Palestinian homes along the border to create what is called the the Philadelphia Corridor here, that basically is another no-go zone along the border. During the second Intifada, and I'm sorry, I had like much closer look at things. You can see how here there used to be the airport, Yasser Arafat airport, that actually lasted only for a little bit less than 2 years and was completely destroyed during the counter-revolution, the Israeli counter-revolution of the Second Intifada. And indeed, during the Second Intifada, the Israeli army destroyed another 2,500 Palestinian homes with those massive Caterpillar D9 armored bulldozers. And then there used to be also settlements, Israeli colonies within the Gaza Strip. There used to be 21 colonies in the Gaza Strip, and then it was destroyed. They were emptied and destroyed in 2005, following a change of strategy from the Israeli state. And the strategy is, of course, the one that allows them to bomb Gaza whenever they see fit. And it started relatively early after that in 2018. You might remember in December 2018, January 2029 was the first massive bombing operation in the Gaza Strip. So as I said, like the part on Gaza is the lightest one of this presentation, whereas this one is going to be the longest one, which is dedicated to the West Bank and Jerusalem, that we can call Al-Quds as well, and the Arabic name. And so if we focus specifically on that part of the map, then we can see, well, I guess we will start with the Israeli colonies themselves. So all those purple areas here that are homes of over 800,000 Israeli settlers, perhaps more now that the construction have been pushed. What did I mean to say? Sorry. Yeah, and that are actually, I mean, you know, I don't talk much about international law. This is not exactly the paradigm that I'm sort of eager to follow, but just for those of you who perhaps have a higher degree of trust towards the international legislation, those 800,000 settlers are essentially living in places that are in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention from 1949, that essentially states that no occupying power of a given territory can transfer part of its civil population to these occupied territories. So if we look specifically at those, this is a map that I had made like a very long time ago, but that are called the Palestinian Archipelago, which I had done quite intuitively, but it just so happens that another French person, Julien Boussac, an artist, had created a map even earlier than that, also called the Palestinian Archipelago, and that is essentially trying to show a metaphorical West Bank in which the areas determined by the Oslo Accord from 1993, those areas that you see here in white and yellow, are the areas called A and B in the sort of again international legislation nomenclature. which are the areas on which the newly formed, after the Oslo Accords, the newly formed Palestinian Authority would have a relative sovereignty on them. And well, in the fact, we realize it's absolutely not true, because we can see we've seen like this entire past years, the Israeli army invading Nablus, invading Jenin in the north, but also invading Ramallah. So the Israeli army comes and go no matter what anyway. But you can see that those areas that are sort of given a certain degree of slight degree of Palestinian autonomy are totally separated from each other, forming therefore this sort of metaphorical archipelago. And therefore the movement between those different islands is by definition totally controlled by the Israeli army. And then you can see those in this sort of Israeli sea of control, like this sort of like light blue metaphorical sea. You can see those dark blue areas, which are the Israeli colonies in the West Bank. So as I said, like the movement between the different islands is totally controlled by the Israeli army. So that's basically one of the checkpoint, what it looks like to be able to control movement. So this checkpoint is between Ramallah and Birzeit, well, and the north of the West Bank in general, but in particular, if you're a student at the University of Birzeit, which is a pretty big university in the West Bank, and also historically one of the key sites of Palestinian resistance, you can be prevented from going to class essentially when by having this checkpoint closed, or to have like an Israeli 17 years old Israeli soldier sort of make you stop and take you away. And you see like this tower you just saw is the same here, and there's those checkpoints that don't look like they have such a huge imprint, although you can see that also these Palestinian homes here clearly was the victim of this implantation, but it goes with an entire sort of architectural apparatus that prevents movement and controlled, allows for the Israeli army to control anyone they want to control. But if we look at the many Israeli colonies in the West Bank, we can look at that. I used to have access to this. I don't know if I should say that publicly. I don't know if I was supposed to have access to that, but to a sort of software that the Palestinian Authority were given the infrastructure by the German state, I believe. That is like a sort of quite powerful equivalent of Google Earth over the West Bank, and to a lesser extent over the Gaza Strip. Which allows for so I went over in this sort of like powerful Google Earth. I went over each of those colonies and took a photo, so to speak. So you can see each colony I will show right now. You will see it from this perspective and then the perspective on the ground. So this one is called Geva Binyamin. It's essentially on the road between, when you go from Ramallah to Bethlehem, you have to pass by it. You will see that I never go in any of those colonies. Like this is part of this as much as a French citizen and as a visibly white person who probably doesn't seem to bear much danger to Israeli settlers. I could probably be able to go in any of them, but this is something that I actually sort of refuse to do. And so that's another one, Halamish, which actually has a particularity. So this is a little bit west of Ramallah, and this has the particularity of facing the Palestinian town of Nabi Saleh, which is in particular, I mean, one of the most, again, like one of the key historical sites of resistance, where people gather to demonstrate against the occupation, but also the home of Haed Tamimi and her family. So this is almost what you see from their, like, just like a dozen of meters from their home. these Israeli settlements. This is a photo I took just this year in May when I was back with friends and comrades of the Palestine Festival of Literature. All of us were on top of this hill looking at this Israeli colony in front of us. This is a sort of entrance of the colony with, as you can see, 2 Israeli soldiers, again, who might be anywhere between 17 to 20 years old, with machine guns manning the entrance. And this is the entrance of Nabi Saleh itself, with an Israeli observation tower and roads that are regularly, if not permanently, shut down, that force Palestinians to do a pretty big detour to actually reach the village. This is Har Gilo. So Har Gilo is in the south of Jerusalem, the south of East Jerusalem, and on the way to one of the access to Bet Jala, which is one of the sort of peripheral neighborhoods peripheral neighborhood. It's one of the towns that was sort of reached by Bethlehem in Bethlehem being like having grown significantly in the past 30 years. This is Har Homa, which is also facing Bethlehem, also in the south of East Jerusalem, a massive Israeli colony that went to replace, I don't have a photo because again, the rule is I use only my photo, but if you ever find a photo of what it used to be like, this little hill south of East Jerusalem, there was just like a beautiful forest on top of this hill that was completely annihilated by the construction of this colony. This is the biggest colony in the entire West Bank. It's called Ma'ale Adumim, and it's home of, if I'm not mistaken, something like 80,000 Israeli settlers. So that's how you see it. Same thing when you're driving from Ramallah to Bethlehem on the West Bank side. If you don't have a permit to cross the wall. This is Pesagot, which is a smaller colony, but that has the particularity of touching Ramallah. So again, when you're in Ramallah, those are your neighbors, basically, your militarized neighbors who at times, like currently, like may just as well come as an armed group in the Palestinian town and start shooting at people or putting fire on building. This is a colony called Koshav Yaakov that is also very close from Ramallah and actually very close from the Palestinian refugee camp of Kalandia. So this is a photo taken from the refugee camp here. And again, for more detail, I mean, something I should have said perhaps, for more details on specifically the architecture of this colony, you can go back to your classics and read Eyal Weizman's Civilian Occupation with Rafi Segal, or even better, his book Hollow Land, that of course is both one of the first sort of like really huge work on the matter and a canonical book for the questions we're looking at today. But quite interestingly, you can see this is a photo I took in 2010, and this is in 2017, and you can see that clearly in particular I think it might have started again towards the end of the Obama administration, but clearly with Trump coming over, the Israeli colonies construction that might have been frozen for a few years have been resumed at full speed, as you can see on this photo. Pisgat Zev is completely in East Jerusalem, and you can see it from the West Bank side or from the refugee Shuafat refugee camps that we'll see a little bit more here. Pisgat Zev is a little bit more towards Jericho, so almost in the Jordan Valley. This might be a little bit repetitive to show all those colonies, but I think they both have common points in architecture and also their specificities depending on the regions they're in right now. So that's why I felt it was important to perhaps show them. And Kiryat Arba is the last one I will show. It's very close from the city of Hebron, of Al-Khalil. and you can see that, yeah, it has like a sort of commercial areas with those militarized tower, and those militarized tower sort of also extend a bit further in Palestinian towns around Al-Khalil, like this one. You can see with those fields that are cultivated by settlers themselves. You can see here an Israeli military jeep. And so, yeah, on the way to, if you go from Bethlehem to Al-Khalil, you pass by this road essentially. And so that was in 2015, and this tower now looks like that in 2023. This is the same one. You can count how many cameras you can find. Quite a few. Similarly, on the same road, you would see other towers of the kind that hovers above Palestinian towns. And that drives me to, quite literally, to Al-Khalil itself, that concentrate on a very, very small perimeter all those sort of, all this sort of settler colonial architectural apparatus that you can see on a map here at the scale of the entire city. So Al-Khalil is, if I'm not mistaken, it is the biggest town in the West Bank. People may assume it's Ramallah because this is where the Palestinian Authority is based, but it is not. And so it's a pretty huge town, but for a lot of it that is under what the Oslo Accord determined to be H2, which is the equivalent of Area C at the scale of the West Bank. So Area C, I haven't talked about it, but essentially it's the sea, as in SEA, that I was showing on the metaphorical map earlier. So it's an area, it's 63% of the West Banks that are still under absolute Israeli military control. And so at the scale of Hebron, of Al-Khalil, a huge part of the city is actually under this sort of areas that at the scale of Al-Khalil is called H2. And then more particularly within the historical town itself, this area is this entire area of the historical part of the city is under full Israeli military control. In particular, the oldest part of town and the old souk, but also importantly, and I'll show it in a minute, the Al-Abrimei Mosque, which is the mosque where Ibrahim and Sarah, so Abraham and Sarah, his wife, are buried. So in that's what it looks like, with all this being completely an Israeli colony, with despite this being like the Islamic cemetery, and this is the old souk. So all this area is under full Israeli military control, but as you will see, this sort of areas, the colony proper is even with a tighter degree of absolute military controls that I'll show in just a second. So this is what it looks like. So you can recognize here on the maps that I just show, I mean on the aerial photo I just show, you can recognize the Islamic cemetery here, and that's like this sort of axis that we cannot really see, but we can sort of guess is the axis of the Israeli colony within the historical town. And adjacent to it is the market, the Palestinian market. But so Israeli settlers are literally living above it, so they're throwing various objects on Palestinians. So Palestinians had to build this sort of protective net above their heads that you will see. This is also something we can see in Jerusalem's old city. So you can see here there's a watchtower above our heads when we are in the market in Hebron. This is a photo from this year. I have to say, this is a little bit seeing the glass with one drop of water more. So it's really not much, but I felt in 2023 the life of the market was a little bit more intense than in the past years that I had visited the city. So you know, we might take what we can in terms of optimism, but I think Palestinians have been fighting hard to reopen some store, to make sure that life continues even despite under duress, and then to renovate some old buildings that would have been otherwise starting to fall off. And yeah, there's like dozens and dozens of Palestinian stores that had been closed during the Second Intifada and that were never opened back, as you can see. So this is even, yeah, those stores are even like beyond various checkpoints, so they're even more empty. This is a Palestinian school over here, so you can imagine being at school with this degree of militarization surrounding you. This is one of the checkpoints towards the Israeli colony itself in the old town. This is actually not the most impressive one, but that shows you a little bit the sort of things that compose the landscape of Palestinians living in Al Khalil. This is another checkpoint, and you can see that I am beyond it myself, as this is something that, as part of PALFest, or the Palestinian Festival of Literature, we've been doing, where international guests are invited to sort of feel the are invited to be able to see for themselves the colony itself, but also feel the discomfort of leaving our Palestinian friends here on that side of the town, because they would not get admitted within. Going back a little bit more towards the market, this is one other checkpoint to the Israeli colony within it. And this is probably the most impressive one. This is a photo from 2015. And now it has evolved into an even bigger monster that looks like that. And so that's the same photo, 2015, 2023, exact same photo. I actually remembered my photo from 2015, so I tried to retake it with the exact same angle. And so that's what it looks like a little bit closer, including with those turnstile, and that leads to like this control of IDs that, again, no Palestinian who would not have like a very special residency permit would not be able to access. And then you can even see the AI-controlled machine gun on top of the checkpoint with this horribly cynical name called Smart Shooter. So you can see the sort of like the most intense form of checkpoints in the West Bank here, quite simply. And beyond this checkpoint, this is what the Israeli colony looks like. There are some Israeli buildings that they built, but this is what's left of the Palestinian town that is, of course, completely desert and then taken over with Zionist propaganda. And then as I said, you have the Ali Brahimi mosque within that colony that has like a special access itself, as you can see, but with like a bunker, an Israeli bunker just above it. But in that case, that can have a Palestinian of Al Khalil actually enter the mosque when but based on the quote unquote goodwill of the occupying army. And actually, when we were there this year with PALFest, we even had the visit of an entire contingent of Israeli military service soldiers penetrating in the mosque itself with their shoes on. And in that case, those are the 17 years old recruits, so to speak, but with, of course, their commanders with machine guns on it. So a quite shocking scene, right in front of the grave of Abraham and Sarah, which actually are also, for part of it, are also in a sort of settler synagogue that they built, Abraham being, of course, the founder, not the founder, but the common ancestor to the three Abrahamic religions that are Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. If we now go to Al-Quds, so Jerusalem, the scale of Al Khalil is very, very small, as you can see. In that case, it's at the scale of an entire city, which is Jerusalem, and it's a little bit more, but you can still see Jerusalem as being like one site where a lot of where all this sort of architecture of occupation is very much at work. So Jerusalem, as a reminder, so the west of Jerusalem was invaded by Zionist paramilitary group in 1948, and then the east of Jerusalem. So that's I should say the north is on the right side here, and I'll in just a second I'll bring back the north on the top side. That might be easier. But here again, using the sort of horizontal screen, I find it useful. So the west part of Jerusalem is this part here, and the east part of Jerusalem is this part here. And so the eastern part of the city, on the other side of the so-called 1949 Green Line, was invaded in June 1967. That includes the old city itself. So the entire old city is within East Jerusalem. And then the city was immediately occupied as an annex to the Israeli state. But then the official year in which Israel officially annexed East Jerusalem, the same way they've been talking about annexing the entire West Bank and no longer occupying it, but just claiming it as fully their own, not just as a sort of militarily and settler occupied territory. So for East Jerusalem, it was 1981. So that means an even higher degree complexity of hierarchy in the sort of colonial administrative status between Palestinians. So if I maybe take a small moment to describe that, at the scale of Palestine, so not even talking about refugees in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and then the diaspora and all that, at the scale of Palestine, you have Palestinians with a different status that are Palestinians who are refugee in Gaza, Palestinians who are refugee in the West Bank, Palestinian in Gaza, Palestinian in the West Bank, Palestinian in the West Bank with a permit to actually cross the apartheid wall, which is only 10% of them, Palestinian without a permit, then Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem, then Palestinians who live in 48 Palestine, who are technically citizens of the Israeli state, but with a very special status. And then Palestinians in East Jerusalem, of course, have a much higher degree of movement of the possibility to move in historical Palestine than Palestinians in the West Bank, and of course even more than Palestinians in Gaza. But then this very particular status of being Palestinian resident of East Jerusalem is the one that is also the most precarious in terms of whether you're able to keep it or not. If you move to, even for some of them, I mean, I know it's a little bit more complicated than that, but even for some of them to just go study abroad or something like that, you might lose your status. And so it's been part of the sort of the colonial administration strategy to also to also make sure that every time they were able to like strip a Palestinian Jerusalemite from their status, from their residency, they would be able to do so, in which case they would find themselves with no other choice to perhaps move to the West Bank, or even not being able to really stay in Palestine. So again, the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing is permanent. It's not just 1948, it is a permanent process. So if you do allow me to again do a 90 degrees rotation of that map, and then even increase to such a way that we're able to see Ramallah here. So Ramallah is here, Bethlehem is here. Abu Dis is sort of used to be a village that grew exponentially in the past 3 decades. and then form and then join the sort of built environment of East Jerusalem, but with the apartheid wall cutting it now. But so of course this is a very small map, so I'll go point by point, and I'll go back every time I show you something else. I'll go back to that map and I'll show you where it is. So we're going to start with Bethlehem, and here in this very particular, so at the very edge of the map here, with this Israeli colony here called Gilo, this bridge over here called the Gilo Viaduct, and you'll see the next few photos I took will be from this area here. So this is a viaduct. This is a bridge that essentially is an Israeli road in which West Bank cars have no possibility to be on, despite being completely in the West Bank and literally above the West Bank. I think, you know, again, going back to E.L. Weizmann's work, this is what he calls the politics of verticality, the fact that the occupation is also, you know, when you show it on a map, it's difficult to show the verticality, but somehow we also need to do sections of the architecture of settler colonialism, because then we're able to appreciate how everything is layered as well. And then on the foreground, you can see also the apartheid walls that in this very specific part, which on the left part you have the valley of Kremisan, is actually not made of concrete but out of barbed wire and metal. And this is where this road here goes right after into a tunnel here to go under Bet Jala. And so this is where the wall creates this weird sort of color over here to prevent Palestinians from accessing this place that Israel considers as its own territory. And this is what the wall looks like looking at the valley behind. If we now move a little bit east over here, which is a Palestinian refugee camp of Aida within Bethlehem, and then I have a few more photos here of that wall over here. That actually this map is from 2015, but things have even become even more complex over here. But this refugee camp essentially looks like that. I'll go back to the architecture of refugee camps at the very end, but basically the apartheid wall is right there, and then in the back of the refugee camp, or in the front, I don't know, this is what it looks like. And then within the north of Bethlehem, leading to, I mean, what separates Bethlehem from Jerusalem, you have the apartheid wall itself that ultimately lead to the 300 checkpoint here, which is the main checkpoint between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. So it's crossed by hundreds of Palestinian workers with permits every morning who have to line up in this corridor and lead to, again, like an architecture of control of bodies, in particular the corridor. Like I'm not going to bore you with that right now, but I find the architectural typology of the corridor as being the sort of archetypical form of control of bodies with this sort of parallel to walls. If we go a little bit further and we go back to the colony of Haroma here that I already showed you, the one that I said like I used to have like a forest, a beautiful forest on top of the hill, and that is now being replaced by this atrocity. This is what it looks like also from Bethlehem, with again the apartheid wall here being a little bit more transparent than it usually is, but with like don't think of it as for its mere physicality in that case, but there's also like an entire technological system of all this is like sensors and all this that prevents any sort of movement from Palestinians to cross it. And then if we move to, sorry, I need to make sure what the next slide is. Yeah, right. If we move over here, which is Al-Quds University campus, so one of the main university as well, Palestinian university, that was very conveniently during the construction of the apartheid wall during the Second Intifada, the wall started to be built in 2003. You can see that the wall has been built to make sure that the campus, which again, as a university, is one of the key sites of our Palestinian resistance. I believe that the photos that circulated a lot recently of Edward Said throwing stones at was on that campus, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, someone might correct me, but I believe it was. And so this is what the campus looks like. So you see Faculty of Educational Sciences, and then in the background you have this apartheid wall that prevents any access to Jerusalem. When you go out from the campus, this is literally your view, the view you have. And then if we go a little bit further to this area here, you will see that, so this is a view of Jerusalem. You recognize the Dome of the Rock here on Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the old city is clearly here. There's a Holy Sepulchre, like where Jesus is buried over here. So all the old city is here, and you can see it, but you can also see that on the foreground, the apartheid wall. And I just so happen to have taken this picture on the roof of what was going to be the building of the Palestinian Legislative Council, in other words, the Palestinian Parliament, that the Oslo Accords had designed to have. And then in 2003, during the Second Intifada, during the construction of the building, the construction was halted by the occupation army as being a dead project, essentially. And so very, very closely from there is when you're in Abu Dis, you can have basically, so someone like me who has a European passport is able to go on that side of the wall, which is the side of the West Bank. The side of the West Bank. Yeah, that separates the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but don't think that the wall is the trace of what the UN calls the Green Line. Like, the wall is not on the Green Line, as you can obviously see. The wall throughout the West Bank is trying to bring as much territory as possible on its western part towards Israel, despite those areas being, for some of it, like here, Palestinian neighborhoods. So here you can see a photo on the east part of the wall, and then this is the same on the west part of the wall. You can recognize the minaret here. And then to show you how much things have been changing, which is not much in that case, this is a photo from 2010. And this is the same photo that I took just this year, 2023, with the addition of this massive, again, like this sort of like almost comical, like you would see that almost as a sort of grotesque piece of art in a museum with, I don't know, again, how many cameras, and then, yeah, anyway. Yeah, you can see how the wall is also following a very particular path, and this is actually the oldest photo of the whole set. This is my first visit in Palestine in 2008, and I really like this photo also because you can see the beautiful hills of Jordan in the back. So that was a day where you could have full visibility. Like those hills are actually, I don't know, like 30 kilometers east of Jerusalem, perhaps even more. And now if we move to the old city itself, and if I remember my slides correctly, this area here, yeah, the area, like a very vibrant area of East Jerusalem, which is along, sorry, I remember my slide. Before that, here, this neighborhood of Silwan, which is, which looks like that, and is also, you might remember 2021, Sharjah, the neighborhoods that is being ethnically cleansed, and I'll show a few photos in just a moment. In the north of East Jerusalem, here on the south of the old city, Silwan has been a little bit less discussed in our solidarity efforts, but is is also a place that is threatened on a daily basis by the takeover of more and more Israeli settlers who have had their eyes on it for quite a while, and they're actually building a cable car between the two sides of this hill. And of course, in the old city itself, you have Al-Aqsa Mosque. You can see here that the windows, again, like if we go to the entire scale of architecture and not talk just about sort of geopolitical dimension and the wall at the scale of dozens of kilometers and everything, but actually if we talk also to the smaller elements, the windows, the door, the key, which I'm always very drawn to, those windows were destroyed by the Israeli army just 2 years ago, throwing tear gas inside the mosque while worshippers were still in it, as you might remember. And so those windows have not been replaced yet. And this is a typical view of the old city, in which you have a Palestinian kindergarten here that has to be surrounded by rusty barbed wire because of some settlers' incursion from other roof. And then right outside the old city, this is a photo I took during what you might remember as being the metal detector intifada, when the Israeli occupation army wanted to place metal detectors at the entrance of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the entire the Al-Aram, like the entire esplanade of which is the third holiest site of Islam in the world. And so Palestinians had revolted, and then consequently the Israeli army had set up some temporary checkpoints, such as this one, for only settlers and tourists to be able to enter the old city. This is Damascus Gate. You can see it in the back here. So Damascus Gate is like one of the key entrance of the old city in the one of the main entrance to the old city, in East Jerusalem. Well, all of them are in East Jerusalem, of course, but I think that's the one that usually Palestinians are known to use. And then you can see this is in 2017. So basically we went from this sort of very clearly temporary apparatus, although you can add to it like those things, the cameras and everything, to this architecture here that is quite new, of a military checkpoint at the entrance of a historical site. Usually the Zionist narrative like sort of very much promotes the weight of history and the sanctity of Jerusalem and all that, but clearly they have no problem whatsoever building a super ugly checkpoint at the entrance of one of the gate. I believe now we're moving to Mount of Olives and Mount Scopus. So here and here. And yeah, looking at the back toward the east. So being here and looking to the east, we can see that road over here that is split by the apartheid wall itself, as you can see. Like the road itself is split between two, with a checkpoint over here. And then a little bit more on the right side, this Israeli highway that goes towards the Dead Sea and that goes under the Mount of Olives to reach the rest of West Jerusalem. Yeah, so now talking about Sherjara itself, that you might remember in 2021, massive Palestinian revolt to prevent the ethnic cleansing of it to be done in silence. So Sherjara is this neighborhood over here, and so more and more each house is being taken over by Israeli settlers. So this one is one of the most recent one in 2021, and it's facing the house of two activists you are probably quite familiar with, Mohammed and Munah El-Kurd, whose house itself is being occupied for part of it by 3 Israeli settlers or actually they might not even be Israelis, actually, American Zionists, or I forgot. I mean, Mohammed would there's probably some, Mohammed probably talked about it somewhere. And then going to, again, continuing our sort of panning north, here you have the Palestinian refugee camp of Shuafat, that is, as you can see, almost completely surrounded by the apartheid wall itself, and all of it is actually falls under the Jerusalem municipality line. So technically, this is a neighborhood of which the Jerusalem municipality, of course, it is a settler colonial municipality, it's an Israeli municipality, but technically it is part of the purview of the Israeli municipality, which is, you know, supposed to provide like a minimum of public services, but it actually was placed on the other side of the apartheid wall, and so this is what it looks like. The fact that the buildings are so high is definitely not innocent in the fact that there is no sort of governing entity on that particular neighborhood, and so there's no building code either. So those buildings are all extremely built in a very sort of precarious way and fragile way, and you can see the wall surrounding the entire neighborhood. And this is a checkpoint to actually access the neighborhood. I mean, if you access it in that direction, it's actually going from East Jerusalem to the refugee camp. So pretty much anyone can go, because that's never that direction. That's a problem. It's going back. And you can see when you're on top of the refugee camp, you can see the Israeli colony right across from it, and you can see quite far actually. Like Ramallah is basically behind those hills. Again, the wall that surrounds all those photos, except for the first one, are inside the camp itself. So we were here, the Shuafat camp. The colony I show you was this colony, and when I said like looking north, that was looking in that direction. And so going closer and closer to the most northern part of East Jerusalem, you have an entire area here that is cut by the wall, despite being, again, Palestinian on both sides. And so this is what it looks like when you go north. Eventually, to reach Kalandia checkpoint, which is the biggest checkpoint of the West Bank that links Jerusalem with Ramallah, a little bit more in the north, with again an entire part of the city being behind the apartheid wall. Now this is a checkpoint looking from the eastern side of so that's where, as a Palestinian worker with a permit, you would go to actually cross the wall to work west of the wall, and essentially this consists in this very convoluted and very controlled apparatus, including those turnstiles that Israeli soldiers have a cruel joy in locking every time someone is in it. So you find yourself quite literally locked. You cannot go back, but you cannot move forward either. If you're anywhere close to claustrophobic, that's a horrible experience. So basically all this pedestrian checkpoint is under those roof, and then the apartheid wall is right behind it, and that is more the car side of things. And recently they set up this pedestrian bridge actually to eventually reach what used to be over here as a former airport of Jerusalem, Palestinian airport. There was even an air company called Air Palestine. And so the airport very recently has been re-asphalted and transformed into a parking lot. So that was it for the West Bank and Jerusalem. And now if we move to this third space, which is 48 Palestine or Israel, we can look at a few different places, in particular Lifta in West Jerusalem. So it's over here. So Lifta used to be a Palestinian village that months prior to the establishment of the State of Israel was raided by Zionist paramilitary group who massacred part of the population and evicted the rest of it. but in Lifta is one of those rare places that is still visible within, despite being surrounded by an Israeli city, namely West Jerusalem. And so there is a power of story, of narrative in those ruins, despite being tagged, as you can see, with by Israeli taggers. That is still quite strong in the story it's able to tell. The architectural proof that the whole Zionist narrative of a land without a people without a land without a people for a people without a land being a total fallacy. And you can see that those ruins, those Palestinian ruins, are still living with like more and more over the years, more and more Israeli architectural neighbors, so to speak. And then within other big cities such as Haifa, which has, I believe, a 25% Palestinian population, you also have those sort of living proof of the lie on which Zionism is built, of Palestinians not really existing or not really having like any sort of like form of towns, or I don't know what now. Yeah, but so you can see that those buildings, those Palestinians buildings, are still very much existing, but more and more they're being quite literally built on by Israeli developer projects. So I think this is also where like architects, like, I mean, you know, this sort of rendering will look all too familiar to many of us over here. And so yeah, I think this is something that we ought to very much consider. And then Jaffa, what used to be one of the biggest Palestinian city in pre-48 Palestine, is perhaps even more painful to visit when you do, with like a sort of liberal Israeli middle class moving more and more from Tel Aviv to Jaffa, through in those kind of buildings that remind us of many architecture of gentrification around the world, but that in that case is an even more intensively colonial gentrification that you can think of. Where the word Jaffa itself is being even denied. Like we are way south of, we are way inside Jaffa in that case, and this former Palestinian building has like the name Tel Aviv on it. And then in the area that separates Tel Aviv from Jaffa, you had a Palestinian neighborhood called Al-Manshir, that was absolutely obliterated by the Zionist paramilitary groups that invaded Jaffa in 1948. And this horrible museum that they built on top of a Palestinian former merchant building right next to the beach, with like, you know, the sort of like the tourists that the Zionist propaganda manages to bring to the beach in Tel Aviv, saying that this is a paradise for all liberals and queers and feminists of the world. Then right next to it, you have this horrible museum dedicated to the history of this Zionist paramilitary group that massacred people and took over Jaffa in 1948. It's called the Igorn, and yeah, I think this museum is also is a testimony to, I think, to something we sort of don't discuss that much because it sounds like too subjective and not very serious to say that, but also how ugly the colony is. And I was just recently in the southwest of the US, right alongside, like along border towns of the Navarro Nation, and that what really hit me, how ugly the colony also is. architecturally speaking, in particular. And yeah, so this museum is probably a testament to that. And then Al-Lid is what people would call the mixed city in 48 Palestine, meaning that it's a city where Palestinians live quite literally alongside Israelis. And then in the city, you can find still some mark of a Palestinian town. It used to be pre-48, with various ruins for those that were not destroyed. In particular, this market in the center of the town, and we went twice with Palfest in 2019 and 2003. Exactly at this place, and when we came back in 2023, it just absolutely hit me, being exactly where I am right now, taking this photo in 2019, that it was that in just the very few years that separated those two photos, they had managed to build like a totally useless European-looking street, and then walled off the market itself. In a pretty outrageous way, as you can see. Like, I mean, if you want to see those 4 years of difference just between those two photos. So yeah, and in Al-Lid it's also the site. I mean, I think quite importantly, the photos I've been showing you in the past 3 minutes or 5 minutes are photos of Palestinian buildings that we can still see there. We can still see the ruins. The ruins are able to tell the story of both how they used to exist and how they were destroyed in 1948. But more often than not, Palestinian villages and entire parts of Palestinian towns have been not just destroyed, the ruins themselves were destroyed. And this is the case here on this site, like very ugly site with like a garbage container and all that. This used to be the site of the house of Georgia Bush, who is the founder of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and on which there's literally nothing left. And then one of the variation, this is no longer in Lid, one of the variation that the Israeli state has been doing to hide also the Palestinian villages and the few ruins that are left is to declare them as natural reserve, as national natural reserve. And then in the case of the Jewish National Fund that you can see here, the JNF, that used to collect pre-48, used to distribute like little money boxes in the Jewish diaspora around the world, in the diaspora that had some Zionist sort of sympathy, but again, pre-48, which is, I think, also something to be judged a little bit differently, although it was inscribed in the very nature of Zionism, what it was going to be, the sort of settler colonial and ethnic cleansing dimension of it. But so the GNF went from having like collecting a bit of money to buy land from Palestinians in historical Palestine, something that pre-48 Palestinian activists, maybe pre-48, perhaps that's not the right word for it, but Palestinian activists were very adamant in Palestinian people not selling their land, precisely fearing what would then happen. And so the GNF went from having this money to buy land to no longer needing to buy land, since the land had been invaded and had become Israel. So it completely started a new activity, which is to grow forest. So that's why you can see a little tree here. And part of what the GNF has been doing is to grow pine forest in particular in a sort of effort of Europeanization of Palestine, like a way for Ashkenazi Israelis, who of course are the sort of like the there's something to be said about that. I'm not a specialist of the Israeli society itself, but there's something to be said about the Ashkenazi supremacy within the Israeli society itself. And so these Eastern European deciders, like wanting to Europeanize the Levant by growing pine trees, is not innocent, and even less innocent is the fact of growing trees quite often on former Palestinian villages in a way that would dissimulate their past presence to everyone. And so finishing with perhaps something a little bit more that has more to do with Palestinian resistance, which is kind of the opposite of this photo right here, which is a photo that I took 6 years ago of the construction site of Rawabi, which is this completely built out of nothing new Palestinian town north of Bir Zayt, well, west of Bir Zayt, really, that a Palestinian millionaire or billionaire perhaps has been pushing to build as a sort of hyperbole of an era that followed the Second Intifada, in which the Palestinian Authority, I don't know, that's something a little bit more subtle to be said, but essentially lost interest in the struggle for liberation and started to want to develop the little part of territory that under its very relative sovereignty, to develop it economically. And so that created like the north side of Ramallah that you can see today, with like many developments, many architectural developments, some of which looks exactly like Israeli colonies in terms of their architecture, to this town of Rawabi that is just like the apex of a Palestinian architecture made for the Palestinian bourgeoisie, in which the occupation becomes invisible. And so Palestinian refugee camp, in my view, are the exact opposite of this architecture. This one is the one of Kalandia, and it is an architecture that might appear at first glance as messy, but I think a much better way to say it, more than messy, is uncontrollable by an outside force, be it the Palestinian Authority, which has no authority over a Palestinian refugee camp anyway, but also of the Israeli military that has quite a bit of trouble fighting the Palestinian fighters, in particular, as you've seen last year in Nablus and Jenin, and this one is in Aida in Bethlehem, the one we already saw. And I think this is what I was hinting at the very beginning in my introduction, in saying that sometimes architecture, in my opinion, architecture can never be liberatory, it can never be emancipatory, but it can sometimes provide the spatial condition of the revolutionary struggle. And my favorite example in that sense is Algiers Kasbah, so the oldest part of Algiers, that in 1957, when the French colonial army was trying to dismantle the Algerian revolution in Algiers, in the capital city, find a lot of trouble fighting the Algerian National Liberation Front in a part of town that was very dense, very sinuous, what the colonizers would call labyrinthine, even though like anyone who lived there, of course, would not find it labyrinthine, no one would get lost, and allows also for the inhabitants, the inhabitants who are not taking necessarily a part in the sort of the most literal or direct form of resistance, to actually very much participate in the solidarity with the fighters, in opening their homes, in allowing for people to move from one roof to another, and to have those different things that in the case of Algiers and in the case of Palestine is I find quite inspiring for the way we think about architecture. And this is the last slide I will have. Happy to also have some friends from who were invited at the PALFest edition of 2019. In the middle, you have Nick Estes, Lakota historian. You can see Samia Heni a little bit behind, Simon Brown, Keller Easterling, Maddie Sabag, Mabel Wilson was right behind Maddie. And this is the entrance of the Aida refugee camp with this massive quay. And usually I said I'm fascinated by keys, but usually it's because they very much crystallize they very much crystallize the political order of architecture in turning a door into a wall, to put it quite simply. But in the symbologic in the symbology, I don't know if that's a word, of Palestinians, a key is a key of return. It's a key that Palestinian refugees, just like many refugees around the world, have kept from their homes. They were evicted from, and they were forcefully displaced from. They kept their key, of course, not as a way to reopen their house that has been destroyed, and again, perhaps even the ruins of their homes have been destroyed, but as a very powerful symbol of the return. And this is also where I want to live it in how what will be the architecture of return of those 5 million refugees who will need to come back in a liberated Palestine. And so the key being this very architectural object, I find it also quite striking to end it on that. And that's it for the 171 slides. Thank you so much for staying, for most of you. And I think we might have a few questions. We have 25 minutes perhaps to take them. I don't know if Farah wants to help me with that.
Well, you could see the Q&A. We've got some interesting questions. If you want to choose from them, would you like to do that? Like, for example, we've got a question from Erica. Is the Philadelphia corridor a walled transportation corridor requiring checkpoint access from side to side?
There's only one checkpoint on the Philadelphia corridor. It's the one that is used when the Sisi administration allows for a crossing between Gaza and Egypt. And again, I mean, also bear in mind that when you reach Egypt, you're basically at the end of the Sinai. And then to reach the closest, to reach Cairo, for example, would take like a very long drive. But again, this checkpoint is, as the nature of checkpoint, can be closed anytime and has been closed many times. And something I forgot to say is in 2015, also Sisi accepted to. Made a deal with the Israeli state to destroy the entire part of the Egyptian side of Rafah, so that the tunnels that allows for the few goods that allows for breaking a little bit the blockade, the very murderous blockade, because again, we're talking about a ceasefire right now, but when the ceasefire comes, is that we will hundreds of people will keep dying because they will have no access to health or no access to food because precisely of the blockade itself. And so those tunnels that leads to Egypt are the only channels that allows for goods to be brought in. So I guess that's it. I'm seeing some have been answered by other. So how are you able to take this many pictures of military zones? I heard the Israeli army may control your camera and your phone when leaving Israel. How do you manage this? How does the IDF not say anything when you're taking pictures of the towers? Thank you for the webinar. Okay, hi Youssef. I suppose most of the picture you've seen today, you've seen them relatively well composed, and so that probably means that I'm in a state of relative comfort that allows me to take those pictures. Some pictures that I have are taken a little bit more hastily, so to speak, but it really depends on the situation. I think in general, settler colonialism being on the one hand so total, just occupying so much space that it literally cannot control every inch of that space, but also quite importantly as well, I think it's been a while now that the Israeli state is not really scared anymore of anyone from the outside to document the occupation, because clearly everyone is aware of it and doesn't really change much about how the US state, in its very colonial complicity with the state of Israel, would act or anything like that. So as much as I think what we're doing tonight or today or this morning is useful, I also think that it doesn't really fundamentally change things to show what's happening. So I don't think they're extremely scared. I mean, the whole phone camera checking there's been some bad experiences for sure, but I tend to send everything online before anyway, and sometimes to leave from Amman airport rather than Tel Aviv's airport, which allows for a lesser I mean, essentially when you enter from Jordan, the entry is very hard, but the exit is pretty easy. And then when you go through Tel Aviv airport, the entry is quite hard, and then the exit can be a nightmare. But also, I mean, elephant in the room. I think being a white guy also allows for a lot of this impunity as well myself, although it's not always been the case, and it's not always been that clear cut. But yeah, clearly that's also something to consider when answering this question. Are the photos being shown okay to share with credit outside this webinar? Yes, I think most of what I do is usually under Creative Commons licensing, so you can all go. What is the permitting process to build the structural support of the Israeli Gilo viaduct in Palestine? The Israeli state can do whatever it wants. It occupies the territory, so I don't think it creates much of a problem. Okay, I think Edward Said throws a rock in one of the visits to the border in south of Lebanon. So perhaps that's me who, I think I know why I made this association, because I remember in 2021, students of Al Quds University throwing stones, and somehow I think the background seemed very similar to me. So I think I mixed up both photos. So Edward Said was in the south of Lebanon, not in Palestine proper. Many questions. And sorry, I think I'm skipping some as well, because every time someone types a new one, it sort of skips as well. So I mean, quite a few people are asking about perhaps some other works than mine to reference, and of course, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, my elders have been Eyal Weizman's work and Sandy Hilal and Alison Ropati in decolonizing architecture. But I think I'm someone who learns as much from his elders as from his younger relatives, and there's been a lot of work, in particular from Palestinian architects, that is important to mention. I mean, I talked about Mali Sabag earlier, Noura Kawi, Dimas Rouji, and many others that now escape my panicking brain after 140 minutes of presentation. But also I think the people I quoted are also people who live despite spending a lot of time in Palestine and having grown up in Palestine until pretty recently, who live in the diaspora. But then many people in Birzeit University are also very importantly to be cited. And but I have to admit, this is also why I wanted to do this presentation strictly based on my own documents, because I think when it comes to the politics of citation of other people's work, I feel that I'm also a little bit missing from, indeed, like some people within Palestine, within the West Bank in particular, we've been doing very important work, and as someone who lives outside, has been perhaps more familiarized with work, in particular of Israeli architects. I mean, Sharon Rothbard would be another one of it. His book, White City, Black City. And of course, Israeli architects. I don't think they would mind me saying that, but who have the massive privilege of having access to the archive of the Zionist state itself, and sort of a way to do research that is widely different from someone who's a researcher or professor or student at Birzeit University or at Al-Quds University.
There's also an interesting question here. It's about, someone wrote, I noticed that a lot of illegal settlements in the West Bank look like American suburban neighborhoods and stand out starkly in contrast to traditional Arab neighborhoods in both Palestine and the Middle East. Is this also a characteristic of colonial architecture?
Yeah, I think it is in many ways, because also, quite simply, some of those settlers are Americans. You know, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know, it might be a little bit a cynical thing to say, but I feel that there was something quite interesting in the way, you know, Israel has always, like let's say Israeli liberals or even like Israeli liberal sympathizers or something like that have been always arguing that Palestine, like occupied Palestine, is widely different from a situation such as Algeria, for example, because you know, Algeria used to be colonized by France, and then settlers could go back to France if they had to, which they did, but for reasons that were not imposed by the Algerian National Liberation Front. But I mean, it's a whole other story. But and you know, I don't think many of us contest anyway that, I mean, are not really interested in talking about a free Palestine that would not also include Israelis who are willing to live on equal terms with Palestinians. But it's interesting how there's always this discourse. And then when we talked about people who have been taken as hostages of Hamas in the past few weeks, then all of a sudden everybody became like Americans, French, and British, and all these kind of things. So clearly, people have many settlers also have like roots in Western countries. And I think, you know, when it comes to settlers in the West Bank, which again is a little bit more, if you do consider international legislation as somewhat having an importance in this whole conversation, I think being a settler in the West Bank is a pretty strong political act from any Zionist enactor. Some people do it because the land is cheaper, because it's even more stolen than the land on the west in Israel. But then many people do it with a sort of a political agenda to annex the West Bank and join it with Israel. And many people who have this sort of like ideological impetus, so to speak, are also people you know, who may have grown up somewhere else than in Palestine, and who may have grown up in the US in particular. So somehow they almost find their perfect habitats indeed in those colonies that indeed look a lot like a US sort of neighborhood. Yeah, I guess that's what I can say about it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with this important spectrum of Europeanization, which again is not, the Israeli society is not white in the way we think of it usually, and you know, it's always important to understand the racial hierarchy within Israeli society itself between Eastern European Ashkenazis, Northern African Sephardis, and people who were expelled from Iberia in 1492, like the Spanish and Portuguese crown, like expelling all Jewish people from Iberia. and then the Mizrahi Jewish from Yemen, from Iraq, and who are Arabophone for a lot of them, and Ethiopian Jews. So there's an entire sort of stratification as well within the Israeli society that is important to consider. But clearly, the sort of dominant racialized group is the Ashkenazi one, and therefore the fact that perhaps it looks like an American neighborhood and the US being itself a European settler colony created by very much British, French, and Spanish colonial powers, bring us back to Europe and bring us back to this effort of Europeanization that also is expressed through architecture.
Okay, there's another interesting question. Salma Ruby says, thanks for the presentation, your effort and time in speaking of memory in relation to space. How's the refugee camps and the new development of Palestinian homes seen and considered? As a temporality in the Palestinian existence or new roots extended in their own land?
Sorry, Fatma, can you repeat?
As a temporality in the Palestinian existence or new roots extended in their own land. This is related to refugee camps and the new developments of Palestinian homes.
Yeah, I mean, refugee camps are certainly not, sometimes I think when it comes to Palestine, but I think it's the case in many settler colonies, but especially in those that literally still have people who remember before 48, before Zionism and all that, there's a tendency towards a form of nostalgia, of pre-colonial nostalgia, which in the case of Palestine usually tends to refer to pre-48 nostalgia, which is a little bit troubling given that before Israel was the British colonial sovereignty, and then before that the Ottoman, even though that's a little bit different, of course. But so nostalgia is always something a little bit tricky, and the architecture of Palestinian refugee camps could not be less nostalgic. Like they don't have the luxury of being nostalgic. They don't have the luxury of building some sort of like pseudo vernacular sort of architecture. They're basically just like concrete slabs with posts, and there's this whole discourse as well on how the very architecture of the camp should always suggest the temporariness of it, like the fact that everybody is always aiming towards return, and so the architecture should suggest that the camp is temporary, and sometimes it's a little bit more the case than others. But I know that someone like Sandy Hilal has a very strong opinion on the matter and says that we should be able to provide an architecture that is dignifying to Palestinian refugees, and this is how she and Alessandro Patti built a school in the Shuafat camp. But so I think I really like this idea of, I mean, it's also easy for me, like as a white French person, to say like nostalgia, pre-colonial nostalgia is something we should fight against, when perhaps because nostalgia does not necessarily touch a particularly emotional side of me, when it very much might for a Palestinian person, for sure. But yeah, I suppose that something that is also proper to the architecture of Palestinian refugee camp is that it doesn't have that luxury. So I also find that quite compelling.
Okay, I'll ask you a question from the YouTube chat, because
Sure.
they're also asking a lot there as well.
Sure.
Zahra Basha says, if architecture cannot be an apparatus for liberation or emancipatory, how can we as architects or students studying architecture utilize its spatial qualities for non-prescriptive means?
I mean, I should preface my answer by saying that this is all my own very subjective view of architecture that should not be fascistic in the way that it imposes itself on everybody else, of course. and that I tend to be a not so subtle person, not so nuanced person. And so therefore I go with my big boots and say stuff like architecture can never be liberatory. But this is truly something I believe, meaning I believe architecture can serve the revolution, if we may say it in overly simplistic terms like this one. But it doesn't serve the revolution in a way that, you know, a colonized person would enter an architecture and then become decolonized. Like, it doesn't exist. It doesn't. Whereas a person might enter a building and become a prisoner. It's called a prison. And by the way, this is also a massive absent of this presentation. Also because, you know, I think it was Youssef asking, like, how can I take those photos? I think it would be a little bit more complicated to take photos of a prison, an Israeli military prison. Despite, I mean, also because of this rule of using my own documents, although I'm very happy to oppose to the key as not the key of return, but the key as the one that that crystallize the political order of settler colonial architecture. I'm very happy to oppose it, the spoon that allowed 6 Palestinian prisoners in 2021 to escape from the Israeli military prison in which they were imprisoned by digging a tunnel. And for me, that's also that's something I was literally just teaching to my students in Los Angeles yesterday, in how the spoon allows for if we reach a scale of time that is sufficiently long, and usually that's the scale of time of liberation, and that's the scale of time of people in prison. If we reach that scale of time sufficiently long, then a spoon can become an instrument of liberation from colonial architecture, as we've seen it, and as such became like a symbol of Palestinian resistance as well, like the spoon, like this very tiny object. And to me, that's truly inspiring. But then, as architects, to actually design buildings that would be emancipatory, for me, that doesn't exist. But then that would serve part of what the revolution is trying to do. That's another topic. I just think that architecture is always an instrument of control of some sort, or protection, but quite often the protection is the protection of the powerful. And then what does that mean for us to design to protect the not powerful, those who are on the receiving end of architecture's violence, usually, is another question. But it's something that I think it's very important, if I leave architecture students with one sort of more general consideration, something to consider, would be to think that architecture is always more, it's so easy for architecture to embody an oppressive political regime. It is much harder. It requires so much. I mean, you know, some of you might be in the US here, as like, you literally have an colonial architectural operation that became a 3-word slogan for a fascistic presidential campaign, like, build that wall. That's 3 words that led to a fascistic presidency in the settler colony we call the United States of America. That is an architectural action. That's how easy it is to conceptualize a settler colonial architecture. Whereas to think of an anti-colonial architecture requires a hell lot more of thinking and humbling, and I believe also community service in many ways as architects, but as humble architects acting in their capacity of architects, just like everybody else is acting in capacity of a nurse or a teacher or a fighter or something.
Okay, there's an interesting question but it's anonymous, so I'm not sure who to address. But what are the conditions on which Palestinians can actually build when Israel controls what materials that come in and out? And how do they enact that control? Because that person said they remember seeing somewhere online how Palestinians depend on recycling the rubbles from destroyed buildings.
Yeah, so that would be Gaza specifically. Well, quite simply, cement is forbidden to enter Gaza. So many buildings that were destroyed in 2014 by the bombings have not been rebuilt, and the only cement that can be brought in is brought through the tunnels, and this is going to be a massive question for the months and years to come, and some things that should be very much, as much as I, of course, agree that we need to demand a ceasefire, I feel like it should be a ceasefire also with the end of the blockade. But even, it's always like the sort of the different horizon of the liberatory struggles. Like, of course, liberation is the ultimate goal. But then blocking the blockade is dismantling the blockade. It should be one that is a little bit closer to us, and then allowing the blockade to enter like the many medical need that will be needed, and the instrument of reconstruction is, to me, very crucial. But at the same time, it's if it is not coming from a balancing of power, that a massive worldwide solidarity with Palestinians would force the state of Israel to obey, rather than something left to their goodwill. Of course, it's never going to happen, and that's why calibrating the way we demand things is absolutely crucial. And on that, I might have to stop it here, because there's over 100 questions, and I think like keeping it in 2 hours is actually probably a reasonable thing to do. But I'm very grateful to everyone who've been here today, and everyone who's been spreading the news, and in particular everyone who've organized collective viewing in architecture schools or in other organizations in Tunis, in Turkey, in Norway, in London, in the US, in Canada, and maybe in some places, and in France, and in places I'm not even aware of. So this is truly beautiful. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much, Léopold Lambert, for this very insightful and informative talk, timely talk as well. And thank you for sharing your research and some on-ground photos and maps. It's been a true honor and a pleasure to host your talk. And we would like everyone to stay tuned for our remaining days in architecture. We have several lectures and events at AUC, American University in Cairo. So please join us in person if you're around. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Léopold.
Have a lovely evening, night, afternoon, morning.
You too. Bye.
Bye.